The moment Tobias Bennett's fingers brushed the polished leather of the bulkhead, the cabin turned cold. A sharp crack, like a whip, cut through the hush of first class. Laura Whitmore's hand flashed through the air and landed square on Tobias's cheek. It wasn't loud, but in that serene enclave of cream leather seats and muted gold accents, it sounded like a gunshot. Tobias's head snapped to the side. The crisp snap of his own jaw felt surreal, as if his body had registered an impact before his mind could even process the meaning. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below and let us know if you've ever been stunned into silence like this. For Theo Bennett, Tobias's twin, the world tilted. He'd been reaching for the minibar, uncorking a sparkling water, and froze mid-gesture. His eyes darted between his brother's reddening cheek and the woman in the navy-trimmed uniform. Laura Whitmore stood ramrod straight, chest forward, her face tight with judgment. The hush was suffocating. No murmur of objection from the nearby passenger in the suit. No quiet gasp from the platinum blonde sipping champagne in the next row. Just a tableau of entitlement staring at two 15-year-olds who had dared to share their world. At 15, Tobias and Theo Bennett had learned to walk softly among giants. Growing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just a stone's throw from the labyrinth of MIT, they'd spent more hours in robotics workshops than on playgrounds. Tobias was the quieter twin, eyes always scanning, processing every detail. Theo, lean and restless, wore his curiosity on his sleeve. Always asking the next question, always pushing boundaries. Their latest triumph, winning the statewide AI for Good Innovation Challenge, had earned them a rare luxury ticket. Seats in first class on Astraeus International's Zurich to Boston flight, an honor normally reserved for CEOs and celebrities. Now Tobias sat stunned, the weight of that privilege slamming into him like a tidal wave of shame. This wasn't recognition, it was repudiation. His hand hovered over his cheek, as if touching it might somehow reverse the slap. Theo planted both feet on the plush carpet, fists clenched at his sides, but his lips quivered with the force of everything he wanted to say, and couldn't. I shouldn't have touched that panel, Tobias thought, but his mind rebelled. Why did a simple gesture of curiosity become an act of trespass? The cabin lights glinted off the polished, burled wood trim of their private suite. And for a moment, Tobias remembered the invitation letter from the Global Youth Ethics and AI Forum, waiting in his locker back home. He and Theo had dreamed of this moment, of stepping onto a world stage to speak about how technology and morality must advance hand in hand. Instead, they'd found themselves in a gilded cage of prejudice. The hush deepened. Every passenger held their breath, watching. The gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines beyond the porthole was the only other sound. Tobias's throat burned. His vision narrowed to the uniformed figure before him. "You," Laura hissed, voice low but sharp, "don't belong here." A bead of sweat traced down Tobias's neck. He looked at Theo, his mirror image, his other half, and saw the same mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief reflected back. Theo took a half step forward, like a boxer entering the ring. "Sir," Theo said, voice quavering, "we've done nothing wrong." Laura's lips curled into a tight, superior smile. "You've got 5 minutes to explain yourselves, or you'll be escorted off this aircraft." She turned on her heel and clicked her heels together, an exclamation point on her command. Nor did the crew stir, except for a flight attendant who hovered at the far aisle, eyes downcast. She knew Laura's reputation, high maintenance, unafraid to throw her weight around, but she also knew this wasn't about safety. It was about control. Tobias swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he began, voice small in that cavernous space. We have the right to be here." Solitude pressed in on them. The rest of the world, even sprawled out in the same room, felt light years away. Tobias let his eyes travel to the sleek laptop screen of the banker 2 rows over, then to the diamond-encrusted bracelet glinting on the wrist of the woman in 2C. He saw himself and Theo through their eyes, intruders, interlopers, liabilities. He wanted to tell them who he was, what he'd built in his school's lab. The late nights Theo and he had spent wiring microcontrollers for their ethics monitoring drone. He wanted to shout, "We're not thieves, we're your future." But his voice died before it left his lips. Instead, he turned to his brother. "Theo, I'm sorry." Theo bristled. "Don't be sorry, I'm the one who's sorry," he snapped, though his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Sorry that this is our world now." They'd spent their lives learning from the giants at MIT, attending workshops, sitting in on lectures, building robots programmed to detect bias in hiring algorithms. But nothing in their curriculum could have taught them how to weather this kind of storm. Moments passed. The flight attendant at the back, the kind-faced one whose eyes flicked nervously between Laura and the Bennett twins, finally stepped forward. "Miss Whitmore, perhaps we should—" But Laura cut her off with a dismissive wave. "No, I'll handle it." Tobias felt the urge to scream, to cry out for help, but his voice lodged itself in his throat. He thought of their mother, waiting at home, proud, and of their father, Langston Bennett, who kept his own counsel and wielded power with an icy precision. Langston believed in quiet strategy over loud protests. He believed that true change was engineered through systems, not shouts. If only Tobias could reach his phone. If only he could call Dad right now. He glanced at the seatbelt sign above. The engines idled, wing lights blinking in readiness. In another moment, this plane would be barreling down the runway toward takeoff, toward Boston, toward the conference where they were supposed to be honored. Instead, Tobias realized, they were stuck in limbo, marked guilty before any evidence had been offered. Theo reached out, clutching Tobias's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but in that fractured moment, it was everything. A promise of solidarity, a shield against despair. Tobias met Theo's gaze and nodded. They would not break here. They could not. "Fine," Tobias said quietly, voice steadier than he felt. "Let's just get through this." Laura's lips twisted. "Collect your bags," she said to the flight attendant, "and prepare to deplane." As the flight attendant, hands shaking, crossed to Tobias and Theo's seats, the tension in the cabin became a living thing. Even the banker had closed his laptop and was peering over the top of the screen. A child being accused of wrongdoing, caught, exposed, drew every eye. Tobias's heart pounded so loudly he thought it might crack ribs. He bent down, unbuckling his seatbelt, fumbling for his backpack. Theo bent too, grabbing the messenger bag that held their presentation notes, their prototype helmet, the launch code for their nascent AI ethics app. Every second stretched like an eternity. In the hush of that gilded cell, Tobias remembered something Dad had said once, after they watched a documentary about civil rights activists who used patience and planning to topple hate. When they expect you to lose control, you're strongest when you're calm. When they want you to shout, speak softly, but make them listen. He straightened up, clutching his bag. Theo mirrored him. They were just two kids, but they had rights. They had dignity. And somewhere, Langston Bennett would be answering that phone and the world would shift. Laura nodded to the flight attendant, whose face was pale. But as she stepped toward the exit door with the flight attendant behind her, Tobias felt a spark, a whisper of hope that this story was far from over. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Flashing airport lights danced across the aisle as Tobias and Theo stepped into the unknown. And in that moment, they were not just boys. They were a signal, a challenge, a promise. The soft spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Bennett family home, casting long rectangles of warmth across the hardwood floor. Tobias Bennett sat at the kitchen island, buttoning the cuffs of his white Oxford-style shirt, the faintest tremor betraying the excitement in his hands. Across from him, his twin brother Theo balanced a mechanical pencil between his fingers, tracing the logo on the invitation envelope once more, as if it were a priceless artifact. "Can you believe this?" Theo murmured, eyes bright. We're actually going to Boston, first class no less, to talk about ethics and AI. Tobias offered a small smile, echoing the energy in his brother's voice. I know, it feels surreal. He paused, threading his hair back behind his ear. 15 years old, and already keynote speakers at a national forum. Their mother, Dr. Aisha Bennett, a soft-spoken neuroscientist who specialized in human-machine interaction, emerged from the breakfast nook carrying a tray stacked with fruit parfaits and whole-grain toast. She placed it gently in front of them. You two look sharp, she said, brushing a stray curl off Tobias's forehead. Breakfast of champions. You've earned it. The twins exchanged a quick glance. Their mother's pride was a familiar comfort. Her belief in their potential had carried them through countless late-night coding sessions and impromptu presentations at their local high school. Beneath that confidence, though, lay a mother's worry, one they sensed but rarely acknowledged out loud. Theo cleared his throat. Mom, thanks for arranging the ride to Logan. And for everything. The lab prep, the letters, the pep talk. He lifted his glass of orange juice in a mock toast. You're the best co-pilot ever. Dr. Bennett smiled, setting down a hand-sewn tote bag embroidered with a small robot icon. Just don't forget your IDs and your security clearance letters from MIT Robotics Lab. She tapped the leather folder she'd placed beside their plates. They'll want to see those at the VIP desk. Tobias picked up the folder, running his thumb over the embossed seal of MIT. Inside lay the handwritten note from Professor Chen, their mentor, vouching for their integrity and stockpiling of research data on AI bias detection. It was an extraordinary honor, one that narrated their journey from making simple line-following bots in the school basement to pioneering a prototype that could audit facial recognition algorithms for fairness. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the evening they'd tested their drone in the school parking lot, its soft whirring blade skimming over the pavement as it flagged every pattern that looked remotely like discrimination. The moment the drone's LED lights blinked green, signaling zero bias detected, was the moment the Massachusetts AI for Good Committee had called them winners. Now, with their pièce de résistance safely packed in their carry-on, 2 prototype helmets wired to stream data to their upcoming Boston presentation, they were poised to take the next leap, speaking before educators, industry leaders, and fellow teens about the moral imperative of ethical AI. All right, boys, their mother said, gathering the empty dishes. Gotta head out soon. Your ride will be here in 10. And remember, stay calm, stay curious, and most importantly, stay yourselves. The final phrase hung in the air like a benediction. Because in a world where they were often the youngest, sometimes the only black students in a sea of white lab coats, authenticity had become their greatest tool. The driveway lights blinked on as Father John's town car rolled up in front of their house. The black SUV looked massive beside their family sedan, its engine radiating a low purr that vibrated through the afternoon air. Tobias and Theo hoisted their backpacks, each emblazoned with the MIT logo, and slipped into the back seat. The leather smelled of newness and quiet authority. Boston Logan, please, Tobias said, offering the driver a polite nod. He caught Theo's eye in the rearview mirror. They both seemed to deflate a little now that the reality of departure was settling in. Theo gripped his messenger bag. Can you believe we'll be in a security lounge in an hour? He whispered. And then, first class. I mean, I saw those suites on YouTube, but I never thought... Tobias cut in, a mix of wonder and nerves lacing his tone. Neither did I, but we've earned this. We worked for it. Outside, rows of maples and oaks blurred past. Cambridge's scholarly calm gave way to the bustle of Route 93, then the low stone columns marking the entrance to Logan International. The town car glided past economy parking lots and budget terminals before pulling into the VIP Circle Drive. They stepped onto the marble floor of Logan's private lounge, a quiet oasis of leather chairs, granite countertops, and a dedicated check-in desk bearing the Astreus International insignia. A uniformed attendant greeted them by name, scanning their IDs and ushering them toward the refrigerated display of sparkling apple ciders and locally roasted espresso. Theo grabbed 2 tall glasses of cider, the tiny bubbles tickling his nose. Tobias poured them each a paper cup of espresso, his secret fuel. As they sipped, they watched a live departure board. Flight AZ321 to Zurich, first class, boarding soon. A hush fell over them. This was the moment, minutes away from stepping into that gleaming fuselage, that elite world they'd only glimpsed from the sidelines. They let themselves breathe it in, the outbound flight pattern humming overhead, the gentle murmur of well-heeled travelers, the rich scent of freshly baked scones wafting from the kitchen. Their mother appeared beside them, phone in hand. "Just got word from Professor Chen," she said, her eyes twinkling. "News outlets are already covering your project. CNN did a brief story. Teen innovators tackle AI bias." She passed them each a tablet displaying the clip. Tobias and Theo, beaming, standing next to their drone prototype, explaining how it could scan hiring software for discriminatory patterns. Theo let out a low whistle. "Wow, we're on TV." Tobias touched the screen, watching himself explain the importance of transparency in algorithmic design. "We have to be ready," he said softly. "Not just to talk about the tech, but to answer questions about real-world impact, jobs, fairness, even ethics of enforcement." Their mother nodded. "And remember, speaking softly can be as powerful as raising your voice. Those viewers are listening for your heart, not volume." She leaned in and kissed each of their cheeks. "Go show them what you've built and who you are." A buzzer sounded. "Flight AZ321 to Zurich now boarding first class." The attendant led them through a velvet rope and toward gate B14, their badges granting them a direct path onto the jet bridge. Each step rattled their nerves into sharp focus. They climbed the narrow stairs onto the Airbus A350, stepping into the cocoon of cream-colored leather seats enclosed by sliding privacy doors. Tobias's breath caught. Polished walnut trim, a built-in minibar stocked with mixers, noise-canceling headphones resting on plush pillows. The cushions looked brand new. The fine stitching spoke of luxury they'd only ever seen in magazines. Theo's eyes widened. "We did it," he breathed. "We're actually here." A flight attendant, smiling, professional, greeted them at the entrance. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Master Bennett. It's an honor to have you with us today." She scanned their boarding passes again and guided them to seats 2A and 2B. "Please make yourselves comfortable. We'll begin our pre-departure service shortly." They settled in, hearts racing, as Tobias slid into his seat and flipped open the interactive screen. Inside the armrest lay a brochure describing the flight's amenities. A gourmet multi-course meal, a curated playlist of classical music to ease turbulence anxiety, and a crash course in the airline's new AI-powered customer service bot. For a moment, everything felt possible. Tobias leaned over and whispered to Theo, voice full of wonder, "Do you ever think we'll look back on this and realize it was the start of something bigger?" Theo grinned. "I hope so." He reached beneath the seat and pulled out their prototype helmet, the one wired to stream their ethics audit software directly to the mainframe. "Just imagine," he said, "if our project ends up saving even a fraction of people from algorithmic bias. This trip, it could change everything." They clicked on the in-flight demo video, a sleek presentation showing their drone mapping out patterns of bias, its LED ring pulsing green when it detected fairness, red when it flagged a problem. Tobias watched his own voice narrate their methodical approach, the countless hours spent validating data, the countless nights spent wrestling with the question, how do you give conscience to machines? He thought of Professor Chen's last words before he'd left campus that morning. "Remember, ethics isn't an add-on. It's baked into every line of code." A soft chime alerted them to the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Astraeus International Flight AZ321 to Zurich. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened while we taxi to the runway. We'll be airborne in just a few minutes." Tobias pressed his thumb against the small camera lens on his helmet, recording the moment they sat poised for takeoff. Two 15-year-olds on the cusp of making history. He tapped the record button on his phone too, capturing the low hum of the engines, the cabin's gentle sway, and the faces of the crew moving with practiced calm around them. He felt Theo's elbow nudge his side. Tobias looked over and saw his brother's eyes glinting with the same combination of pride and anticipation he felt himself. Their journey had only just begun, and already it was nothing like they had expected. As the jet began to roll toward the runway, Tobias pressed record one last time and breathed out, "Ready, Theo?" Theo nodded, adjusting his seatbelt. "Ready." The seats vibrated as the engines spooled up, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, the force of acceleration pressed them back, and the cabin slipped forward into the sky. Cambridge to Boston was a short trip, but for Tobias and Theo Bennett, it was the first leg of a flight they had truly earned. And as they soared into the clouds, they carried with them not just their project, but a promise that wherever technology could go, conscience would follow. Tobias eased himself into the plush cream leather of 2A, marveling at how deep the cushion felt beneath him. He ran one hand over the smooth walnut armrest, tracing the grain, until his fingertips found the tiny touch panel embedded in its side. With a gentle tap, the overhead light dimmed, and a soft glow emerged from the reading lamp. Beside him, Theo snapped open the compartment in the center console and grinned when he discovered a pair of wireless noise-canceling headphones nestled alongside a sleek minibar stocked with sparkling apple cider, artisan chocolate truffles, and even a miniature jar of honey from Swiss apiaries. "Check it out," Theo whispered, lifting the headphones like treasure. "These are the same ones we tested for our drone project, only, a lot fancier." Tobias smiled. "Yeah, they'll block out the engine roar." He clicked the headphones onto his ears and pressed play on his phone, letting the soft hum of classical music fill his mind. It took a moment for him to breathe fully, imagining that the little screen in front of him, branded with the Astraeus International logo, was streaming through their upcoming presentation rehearsal. Thrilled by the novelty, Theo leaned over. "This is insane. I feel like I'm in a sci-fi movie." His eyes danced with that familiar spark of excitement that always bubbled up when he encountered new tech. As they settled in, a hush fell over the cabin again. A low, expectant hush geared toward genteel conversation and whispered exchanges. Tobias glanced up from the touchscreen menu, taking in the other passengers. A retired diplomat polishing his silver watch, a film producer tapping plot notes into a tablet, a couture-clad woman in 3C adjusting her silk scarf. Tobias cleared his throat and whispered, "Ready to pick a movie?" Before Theo could answer, a voice lilting with acoustic disapproval drifted over the armrest wall. "Excuse me." They both turned toward 3C, where the woman in the ivory Chanel jacket glared at them. She was impeccably groomed, hair swept back in a smooth chignon, nails lacquered the palest pink, and every inch of her posture broadcast ownership of this space. In one hand, she held a flute of chilled champagne. In the other, a monogrammed leather tote. Tobias offered her a polite nod. "Hi there." The woman's lips curved into a polite, dismissive smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, voice soft but seething with reproach. "But shouldn't you two be elsewhere?" Theo bristled. He was 15, yes, but he'd spent enough time presenting to tough undergraduate panels and skeptical grant committees to know a challenge when he saw it. "We have the same tickets as everyone else," he replied evenly. The woman's brow lifted. She turned her head slightly, addressing Laura Whitmore, who hovered nearby in her navy-trimmed uniform. "Perhaps someone should verify that these boys have legitimate boarding passes?" A flicker of triumph passed across Laura's face. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing at Tobias. "If you don't mind," she said, tone frosty, "let me see your boarding passes." Tobias felt his heart tick up. He unclipped the lanyard around his neck and held out his card, an embossed platinum pass with his name and photo. Theo produced his identical twin card. Laura inspected them, lips pursed. "These are valid," she acknowledged, handing them back. but I'll be keeping an eye on you." With that, she turned on her heel and moved down the aisle, her heels clicking with an almost triumphant echo as she passed the other first-class suites. Tobias set his card back in his breast pocket and exhaled. "Wow," he muttered. "That was ungodly." Theo finished for him. He leaned back and studied the cabin's mood. Many of the passengers had resumed their magazines or screens, but Tobias caught a few sidelong glances, some sympathetic, others curious, a handful with that same expression of thinly veiled contempt he'd seen moments ago. He closed his eyes, letting the classical music in his ears anchor him. "Ignore it," he said quietly. "They don't matter." Theo frowned, but nodded. "You're right. Let's—" A sudden jolt drew both of them to the window. The Airbus's wheels had begun to roll, taxiing toward the runway. The engine spooled up in a reassuring rumble. The cabin lights dimmed further, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, polite and gentle. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight AZ321 to Zurich. We'll be taking off shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened." Tobias clicked his belt into place, eyes drifting back to the woman in 3C. She swirled her champagne glass and gazed out the window, shoulders squared as though this entire incident had never happened. He swallowed and turned to Theo. "Hey," he whispered. "Let's focus on the presentation notes I sent to your tablet. Remember what Professor Chen said. Keep it tight, keep it hopeful, keep it real." Theo nodded, blinking back tension. He tapped on his personal tablet, pulling up the slides they'd rehearsed. Slide 1, the problem of unchecked algorithmic bias. Slide 2, their drone's technical specs. Slide 3, the early results. Tobias leaned forward, and together they rehearsed the first few lines in soft whispers so no one else could overhear. Tobias, softly. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're honored to be here as the youngest speakers at this forum." Theo, quietly. "And we believe that as AI grows, so must our responsibility to ensure fairness." They repeated it twice, nodding to each other. Theo's voice was steadier on the second take. Tobias felt his own resolve harden. Then, as if on cue, Laura reappeared at their side, arms folded. "Your in-flight entertainment starts now," she said, voice clipped. "The cabin doors are closed. If there's nothing else—" He lifted his hand. "Actually, would it be possible to see a demonstration of the seat's recline function? It's my first time on this model." Laura's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Tobias feared she would refuse, but she drew a slow breath. "Fine. Under that tray table is a manual. You can read it." "Thank you," Tobias said, voice calm. He didn't mention that he'd already watched a dozen unboxing videos the night before. He leaned down, flipped up the tray table, and consulted the tiny diagram. With a click and a soft hiss, the seat back shifted into a full lie-flat position. He tested it gingerly, then returned to the upright setting. Theo laughed softly, like a sigh of relief. "Okay, that was worth it." Tobias straightened. "Yeah, and look." He pressed a button on the console and watched as the minibar's door slid open, revealing more treats. Artisanal nuts, gourmet cheeses, even a tiny bottle of Vermont maple syrup. "I guess we'll start with cider and cheese when the meal service comes." He popped the top on a cider and offered one to Theo. They clinked glasses, silent solidarity in the face of condescension. Theo took a sip, eyes closed, savoring that sweet bubble outside. The jet accelerated into the sky. The cabin tilted, and the world fell away beneath them. Tobias pressed his palm against the window, feeling the rush of air miles below, and thought, "We earned this. We belong here." He turned back to Theo. "You know," he said, voice steady, "they can whisper, they can judge, but in here, it's our turn to shine." Theo's grin was genuine now. "Let's do it." They sat together, two 15-year-olds on their way to changing the conversation about ethics and technology, undaunted by that single hateful glance, determined to prove that belonging wasn't measured by privilege, but by purpose. And as the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, Tobias tapped open his streaming app on the seatback screen, queued up their practice video one more time, and settled in. Because in that moment, the only voice that mattered was their own. The minute Laura Whitmore's fingers slipped from Tobias's boarding pass back into her pocket, his chest tightened. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the aisle, only to return moments later flanked by two uniformed security officers. "Mr. Bennett, Master Bennett," she said, voice low but carrying through the hush. "You're to come with us." She gestured curtly toward the cabin door as though she were ushering unruly pets. Tobias felt every head turn. The glint of silver cufflinks, the gleam of a champagne flute held aloft. Everyone was watching, sizing up the spectacle. Theo's hand closed over his brother's sleeve. "What's happening?" he mouthed, panic flickering in his eyes. Laura didn't give them time to answer. "You've been reported for rummaging through passenger luggage," she declared, the words punctuated by the officers stepping forward. One reached for Tobias's elbow, the other for Theo's shoulder. I wasn't," Tobias stammered, but the officer's grip was firm. He glanced at Theo, eyes wide with the shock of betrayal. In the last few hours, they'd gone from honored juvenile delegates to suspects in the cabin's silent theater. "Please stand and leave your belongings," the officer said, voice clipped. Tobias rose, backpack thumping onto the floor. His fingers fumbled with the zipper, heart hammering. He caught a glimpse of Theo doing the same, trembling hand pulling at the Velcro of his messenger bag. Around them, the cabin's microcosm of privilege turned into a courtroom. The financier in 1A closed his laptop and leaned forward, curiosity and judgment etched on his features. A fashion editor in 3D peered over her sunglasses, lips curved into a ribbon of disdain. No one spoke up for them. Even the kind-faced flight attendant, Sarah, pressed her palms together at chest height, eyes downcast. She wanted to intervene. Tobias could see it in her quivering jaw, but she was trapped by Laura's silent command. The first officer snapped a pair of handcuffs from his belt and held them out. Tobias's mouth went dry. Theo swallowed, and then slid forward to help his brother fasten the cuffs. "We're not criminals," Theo insisted, voice shaking. "You have no right." "Enough," the officer interrupted, his tone final. He secured the cuffs just tight enough that Tobias couldn't twist his wrists more than an inch. A quick test of the bracelets and a nod between the guards, and they guided the twins up the narrow aisle. Tobias stared at the seat where he'd been moments ago, 2A, the spacious suite with the full flat recline. Now it was empty, and he felt the weight of that emptiness in his bones. Theo's shoulders hunched forward as they passed the other passengers. Tobias slid his hand into Theo's free hand for reassurance. He wondered if anyone felt their fear, or if they'd chosen to look away. At the cabin door, a crisp gust of cool airport air brushed his face as the jet bridge lights flickered through the open hatch. The second officer, taller, with a close-cropped mustache, cleared his throat and motioned them off. Tobias's legs felt unsteady, but he marched forward, head held as high as he could. He caught Laura's eyes one last time. Her lips twitched into what might have been satisfaction or relief. She watched them go, then turned back to the cabin as if nothing had happened, or perhaps as if she'd just restored order to a world she believed was hers to police. Through the jet bridge they walked, security officers flanking them like escorts for a menacing threat. Tobias's backpack scraped the wall. Theo's bag bumped behind him. Each step echoed with humiliation. He pictured the windowless security office ahead, gray walls, metal table, those plastic chairs that scraped when you sat. It would be a different kind of spotlight, harsher and more intimate. When the door clicked shut behind them, the hush inside first class snapped back into place. Tobias glanced over his shoulder and saw Sarah watching from the galley, tears in her eyes. She looked away as soon as their eyes met, but Tobias nodded once, a wordless thank you for her empathy. Outside, two airport agents in dark blue stood ready at the end of the bridge. They looked professional, impassive, but Tobias sensed Theo's pulse race when they saw the handcuffs. The agents each took an arm, Tobias's left, Theo's right, and led them down the ridge of the jet bridge, lights blinking overhead. They emerged into the terminal under a sign that read, "Arrivals, Departures." Tobias blinked against the bright fluorescent bulbs. Families and business travelers streamed past, some pausing to stare, others stepping around them as though they were a roped-off exhibit. A mother with a stroller glanced over, frowned, and ushered her toddler away. Tobias kept his gaze forward, breathing through his nose, counting each step. Theo's voice cracked beside him. "This is insane! They think we're criminals!" His words tumbled in a rush, emotion choking each syllable. Tobias squeezed his brother's forearm. "We'll fix it. Dad will fix it." He tried to sound certain, but his throat felt raw. They'd reheard their father's calm precision 100 times. When they expect you to lose control, be quieter, but more powerful. Now, they had to trust that quiet power to reach him. At the end of the bridge, they turned a corner into a small vestibule. 2 chairs sat against the wall, and a small windowless door to the left sported a sign, "Secured Passenger Processing." The officers nudged them inside. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. A single metal table stood in the center, lit by a bare bulb swinging overhead. Tobias and Theo sat side by side, their hands still cuffed. One of the officers closed the door and leaned against the wall, checking his phone. Theo lifted his chin. "I'm not bowing my head," he said, voice fierce in the tiny room. "They can't treat us like this." Tobias exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "We don't have a choice now." He gestured at the handcuffs. "But we'll get through this." Behind the table, a clerk in plain clothes keyed on a computer, fingers tapping lightly. "Names, birth dates, addresses," he instructed without looking up. They recited the words with hollow voices. Tobias watched the blinking cursor as the clerk typed their information. Each keystroke felt like a final nail in the coffin of their dignity, but also a record they would challenge. When the clerk hit Enter, the screen displayed, "Possible security threat, pending review." Tobias swallowed. Theo shot him a look, anger and fear colliding in his eyes. Tobias closed them, sealed his resolve. In the next room, just beyond this gray door, their father would be waiting. In his own kind of cockpit, powered by data and influence, ready to reroute the course of their flight. They heard the beep of a phone on the clerk's desk. He glanced at it, then pressed the intercom. Tobias braced himself. "Purser Michael to the cockpit," the clerk's voice echoed. The overhead speaker crackled. In the distant cabin, Tobias knew Laura would be breathing easier now that the threat was contained. But beyond that, in the bowels of Zurich Airport, 2 15-year-olds sat cuffed to a metal chair, waiting for a rescue of system and strategy, not shouts or protests. Theo leaned in. "You think he'll help?" Tobias's voice was low, unshakable. "He will." And with that final promise in the stale, silent room, they braced for the next phase of their journey, knowing that their greatest trial was only just beginning. The security office was smaller than Tobias expected. No windows, gray cinder block walls. A single overhead fluorescent light that hummed like an interrogation drone. He and Theo sat on plastic chairs bolted to the floor, wrists still cuffed to a metal table between them. The click and whirl of an air vent overhead was the only soundtrack besides the distant murmur of the terminal beyond the steel door. A guard in a navy blazer and crisp tie leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes flicking between the twins. He cleared his throat. "All right, kids," he began, voice flat. "We need to know how 2 15-year-olds end up in first class without, how do I put this, special credentials. So tell me, how did you get those tickets?" Tobias swallowed. The question felt, somehow, both absurd and accusatory. He looked at Theo, pale, hunched over, shoulders shaking as though he might collapse under the weight of embarrassment. Tobias drew a breath. "Sir, he said, voice low but steady. Our father bought the tickets. He works with the airline's partners. He's an investor in their ethics fund. They gave us first-class seats for speaking at a youth AI ethics conference in Boston. The guard's expression didn't soften. Instead, he tapped a pen against the tabletop. Investor, huh? That doesn't explain why you're here now. He glanced at the monitor behind him, which displayed a security camera feed of the cabin. 2 boys in seats 2A and 2B, smiling before the moment everything went wrong. According to their report, you were seen fiddling with passenger luggage. That's theft territory, wouldn't you say? Theo's lip quivered, a single tear tracking down his cheek. He leaned forward, voice cracking. We didn't touch anyone's bag. I wasn't even near their stuff. He swallowed and shook his head. I was just sitting. The guard sighed and rubbed his temple. Look, I don't want to be here all day parsing truth from kids' stories. But first class isn't a playground. It's a privilege. So, I gotta ask, what were you doing up there? Tobias pressed his palms flat against the table, fighting the tremor in his fingers. We were invited. We had our passes. We were working on our presentation, testing the cabin's AI-powered lighting controls as part of our ethics research. He hesitated, then added, we were respectful. We didn't bother anyone. Respectful, the guard echoed, tone skeptical. He leaned back and folded his arms. Yet here you are, dragged off a plane like common criminals. You tell me, does that feel respectful? A cold flush crept up Tobias's neck. He clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the scuffed linoleum between them. No, he managed. It doesn't. The guard nodded slowly. That's your answer then. You're too young to know better, I guess. He looked at Theo, whose shoulders trembled so violently Tobias feared he'd catch him in his arms. What about you, kid? He said, pointing at Theo. What do you think? Theo swallowed, wiping his cheek with the back of his hand. I feel like they're saying we don't belong. Like our voices, our work, our achievements. They don't matter because of how we look. His voice broke, and he covered his face with both hands. The guard sighed again, a rare crack in his professional armor. He glanced at Tobias. You hear that? You hear what he's saying? This isn't about safety. It's comfort zones. He looked away, as though wrestling with a conscience. But rules are rules. If I let you go, I'll get in trouble. So, we do this to keep order. To keep the cabin safe for the paying customers. You and you, he jabbed a finger at their chests, make people uncomfortable up there. That's our job. Tobias felt a wave of shame wash over him. He'd fought so hard to prove that technology could detect and correct bias. But here, bias had caught him entirely off guard. He straightened in his seat, shoulders back. So because we're different, it's okay to treat us like threats? The guard's jaw ticked. He rubbed his forehead and closed his eyes. I didn't say that. I said I'm following orders. His voice softened. But if I owned the airline, maybe I'd do things differently. Maybe I'd listen to you. Tobias's heart twisted. For a moment, the guard looked tired, like a man who'd worn his uniform too long, who'd seen too many incidents that weren't really incidents at all. Tobias wanted to stand, to shake him, implore him. But he stayed seated, chest tight. Theo peeked through his fingers. Why? He whispered. Why do they care so much about first class? The guard met his eyes. Because it's rarefied air. People paid a lot for that seat. They expect safety, but they confuse entitlement with safety. They think discomfort, seeing you here, is dangerous. It isn't. He stood, sighed, and unholstered a pair of scissors. Let me take these off at least. He clipped the cuffs off Tobias first, then Theo. The metal rings fell away like chains. Tobias rubbed his wrists, flexing his fingers. Theo did the same. The guard placed the handcuffs on the table. You kids go. Just don't come back up there. He looked at Tobias. Tell your dad he should have the cabin shame training updated. I mean, real training. Tobias hesitated, then nodded. I will. He sounded small, but he felt the weight shift inside him. Less humiliation, more resolve. Theo cleared his throat. "Thank you." The guard nodded once, then stepped back. "Get out of here before I change my mind." He opened the door. Tobias and Theo walked out into the harsh white light of the terminal corridor. The breeze of the main area hit them like a shock. Tobias looked at Theo's pale face and offered a tentative smile. Theo managed a shaky one back. They followed the guard down the hallway, past rows of seats filled with oblivious travelers. No one cheered, no one apologized. But Tobias felt a quiet shift in his chest, the start of something stronger than despair. Outside the security office, the sky over Zurich was a cool slate. Tobias pressed his palm against the wall, gathering the sting of tears. "We need to tell Dad." Theo nodded, voice small but firm. "Yeah, and then we fix this." They stepped into the main terminal, their shoulders straight. Two 15-year-olds who had been told they didn't belong and refused to accept it. The Zurich terminal clock glowed 3:02 a.m., small, impersonal digits hanging over a deserted row of seats. Tobias and Theo sat huddled on a bench, the flash of emergency exit signs painting their faces in intermittent red. Their backpacks lay at their feet, heavy with prototypes and presentation notes they'd never reach Boston to share. Tobias's throat felt raw. He pulled his phone from his pocket. One bar of service. He tapped Dad, heart pounding so hard he thought Marcus Bennett might hear it through the speaker. "Hey, Dad," Tobias said, voice cracking. He pressed the phone tighter. "It's Tobias." "Son, it's late. Everything okay?" Marcus's calm timbre crackled through the line, a CEO's poise wrapped in a father's concern. "No," Tobias choked. He glanced at Theo, whose shoulders shook with stifled sobs. They slapped us, Dad. A flight attendant, right across my face. Then they had security drag us off the plane." He swallowed, fighting for air. "They're holding us in some back room, like criminals." Silence stretched. 5 seconds, then 10. Tobias counted. Each second a hammer blow. He felt Theo's hand tighten around his. Finally, Marcus's voice cut in, measured and quiet. "Where is the crew?" Tobias blinked. "The crew?" "Yes," Marcus repeated, each word deliberate. "The flight crew, the purser, the attendant. I need their names and positions." Tobias frowned. "Dad, it's not about them. They made a false accusation." "Answer the question." Marcus's tone steeled. "Now." Theo looked at Tobias, bewildered. Tobias exhaled and spoke clearly. "The purser was Michael Davies. The attendant was Laura Whitmore." He rattled off their positions. First-class purser, lead flight attendant. Every syllable a lifeline back to hope. "Good," Marcus said softly. "Stay put. Don't let anyone approach you. I'm pulling every string I have." Tobias felt a knot in his chest loosen. "Dad, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied. "I'll have this plane returned to the gate within minutes. Security will meet you there. Keep your heads down. Stay calm. I'll handle the rest." Tobias leaned back, phone pressed to his ear. The terminal felt suddenly spacious, the harsh lights a little less cold. Theo exhaled. A long, shaky breath. "Can you really do that?" Theo whispered. Tobias nodded, though Marcus couldn't see it. "Dad said so." He closed his eyes, letting the words settle. "Stay calm. I'll handle the rest." A glimmer of relief flickered, a beacon in their midnight ordeal. Marcus's voice came one last time. "I love you, boys. Hang tight." "I love you too, Dad." Tobias ended the call and tucked the phone away. He looked at Theo, whose eyes shone with gratitude. In that moment, the twins weren't just abandoned kids in an airport. They were children with a champion. The distant rumble of airport equipment shifted, and somewhere, a gate agent's voice crackled over the PA. Flight AZ321 returning to gate B14. Tobias stood, drawing Theo up with him. Theo brushed his tears away and squared his shoulders. Tobias offered his brother a small, determined smile. They might have lost their seats 5 minutes ago, but now they had the promise of their father's return. And that was worth fighting for. Langston Bennett's home office was quiet at 3:15 a.m., the only light coming from the cityscape beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. A single lamp illuminated his polished mahogany desk, where 2 monitors glowed against the darkness. One displayed the real-time security feed from Flight AZ321's first-class cabin. The other, his secure Ethos Core founder terminal. He had answers now. The purser's name, the attendant's name. He knew exactly who had orchestrated the twins' disgrace. There was no room for anger here, only precision. Langston tapped a customized keypad beside the monitors, drawing up a prompt in bold red letters. Ethos Core V1.0, Founder Override. Enter Override. Code. His hand hovered for a moment over the biometric scanner. He closed his eyes, centered himself. This was the tool he'd helped build a decade ago so that no organization could hide behind bureaucracy when ethics were at stake. Tonight, he would prove its power. 15 years of development had led to this moment. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, then keyed in Override E5X Bennett. A soft chime confirmed his identity, and the screen shifted to the Flight AZ321 compliance profile. He watched as the cabin's ethical conduct score tumbled from a pristine 98.7 to 22.4, a plummet so sudden it stuttered the charts. Next to the score, a status message blinked. Engine X severe violation. Ethics, lockdown mode activated. Langston allowed himself a single breath of satisfaction. With one command, he had stripped Astreus International of its unearned sheen. A second window opened, outlining the immediate consequences. Tier 1. Lockdown. All AI-driven cabin services disabled. ESG funding hold. 1.7B in syndicate credits frozen. Partner review. Automatic notification to 41 global ESG partners. He didn't need to see the numbers. He felt them. The storm was already gathering. Outside his office, the hum of Boston's late-night traffic reminded him this was more than a corporate maneuver. It was a father defending his children, a man refusing to let prejudice go unpunished. He leaned back, pensively scrolling through the cabin feed. Tobias's still form, eyes wide with fear, Theo's trembling frame. In that moment, the cold data on his screen translated into raw humanity. Ethos Core sent automated messages to every stakeholder, a quiet, devastating ripple through the financial world. Within seconds, trading terminals at partner banks flashed red, and an email from the EU Aviation Board arrived, requesting an emergency ethics briefing. Langston minimized the video feed and allowed himself a moment to steel his resolve. He typed a short memo to his executive assistant, Chloe. Activate crisis response team. Prepare press statement. Stellara International holding Astreus accountable. I want a full audit protocol in Geneva by 9 a.m. He hit send. Then he reached for his phone and dialed the head of operations at Zurich Airport. David, he said, voice calm but unreadable. This is Marcus Bennett. You have 9 minutes to return Flight AZ321 to the gate, ground the crew, and secure the cabin. I've marked this a national security risk under the new ethics lockdown policy. Do it now. The line went silent for a heartbeat. Yes, sir, David stammered. Langston ended the call and stared at the monitors. 2 15-year-olds awaiting rescue and a system bending to his will. He settled back in his chair, the dim light outlining his silhouette, and exhaled. This was the power of infra-ethics. The quiet click of accountability in a world that too often whispered injustice. Tonight, the code had spoken louder than prejudice ever could. Langston Bennett leaned forward as the first ripple hit his Ethos Core dashboard. At exactly 3:24 a.m., 9 minutes after entering his override code, a cascade of red icons began blinking across the screen. On the left, the global airline network map shuddered as 4 major carriers, Astraeus International, Celeste Wings, Horizon Skyways, and Viridian Air, saw their ESG funding pools instantly locked. A total of $1.7 billion in ethical investment credits froze in place, unable to move until each airline submitted to a compliance review. In the center panel, a live feed from a Zurich trading floor showed brokers springing from their seats, shouting into headsets. The Bloomberg terminals flashed ticker symbols for the 3 allied banks, Nordtech Bank, Alpine Credit Union, and Geneva Financial Trust, and each bore an ominous, frozen watermark as their credit lines locked down. The hum of conversation turned into a roar of confusion and panic. On the right, a diagram of Flight AZ321's cabin systems flickered. The AI-driven lighting, turbulence predicting software, and automated in-flight service bots all switched to service suspended mode. A status message blinked, ethics lockdown mode, cabin AI offline. Langston closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Tobias and Theo. Far below, the twins waited in a sterile airport room, cuffed to a metal table. He pictured the anxiety in their eyes, the longing for rescue, for vindication. With one silent command, he had altered the course of their ordeal. Back on board, Purser Michael Davies stood in the galley, staring at his tablet in disbelief. The intercom crackled overhead. "Attention cabin crew, all non-essential systems are to remain offline until further notice. We are returning to gate B14. Michael's mind raced. He had executed a false security report on 2 15-year-olds, Tobias and Theo Bennett, and now, in mere minutes, his airline's finances had imploded. Champagne glasses rattled in cart aisles as attendants struggled to keep calm. Sarah, the junior flight attendant who had borne witness to Tobias and Theo's humiliation, blinked back tears. She knew the purge hadn't just been financial. It was a signal that Astraeus International's ethics score had plunged into crisis. She caught Michael's eye and gave him a small, sorrowful shake of the head. In first class, the banker 2 rows over closed his laptop and placed a hand on his forehead. $1.7 billion, he muttered to his wife. Just like that? She sipped her bitter espresso, gaze flicking to the empty seats of 2A and 2B. "They're innocent," she whispered. But no one stood up. In a sleek tower halfway across the world, executives at Celeste Wings huddled around a conference table. Their CEO, Elena Martinez, stared at the live Ethos Core report on a wall screen. Red bars climbed toward the top. A glitching meter marked severe violation. "We need an immediate ethics brief," Martinez snapped. "Put Crisis Council on standby, inform the board, notify the regulators, and someone get me Langston Bennett." Her voice trembled with urgency. The ripple effect was global. Within 9 minutes, every ESG investor was demanding explanations. Every partner was pulling back collateral, and credit committees had issued automatic holds. For these airlines, the runway to financial recovery was suddenly closed. Back in Zurich, Flight AZ321 coasted down the taxiway in reverse, wingtip lights winking an apology to the runway. The cabin door reopened with a hiss, and the mustached security officer stood at the threshold, shielded by the jet bridge. Tobias and Theo emerged into the corridor, blinking against the bright fluorescent lamps. The mustached officer nodded curtly and lifted the cuffs, freeing their wrists. Behind them, the plane's AI system sat dark. No mood lighting, no digital menus, no autonomous drink delivery. The hush was more profound than the cabin's earlier silence, an echo of accountability. Theo looked back over his shoulder at Michael Davies peering through the small cabin window. The purser's face was ashen. Michael mouthed an apology, or perhaps a plea. Tobias couldn't tell which. Tobias squeezed his brother's shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. Theo inhaled deep, firming his spine. "Let's go." They walked side by side down the bridge. their backpacks heavy but their hearts lighter. The same terminal corridor that had seemed so hostile hours ago now felt like a passage to justice. In Boston, at the Global Youth Ethics and AI Forum, attendees refreshed their phones, stunned by social media alerts. A trending headline blared, "Teenage brothers slapped. Airlines 1.7B ESG credit freezes in minutes." Panels paused as news anchors dissected the ramifications. Professor Chen tapped his tablet in disbelief. "They're changing the rules," he said to the head of the conference. "Langston Bennett just rewrote the playbook for ethical accountability." Back on the tarmac, Langston waited at the gate entrance, arms crossed. As the bridge retracted, he saw his sons emerge, dusty, shaken, but unbroken. He pushed through the small crowd of airport staff, his tailored suit a contrast to their rumpled backpacks. When Tobias and Theo spotted him, their faces split into relieved, unguarded smiles. Langston swept them both into a swift embrace. No words were needed. His quiet strength spoke volumes. Behind them, the Airbus A350 sat silent, its cabin dark, its systems offline, its corporate hubris laid bare. In 9 minutes, the world had seen what happens when prejudice meets resolve. And at the heart of it all were two 15-year-olds who refused to disappear, and a father who refused to let them. Langston Bennett stood in front of his home's glass facade, phone in hand, as his finger hovered over the live broadcast icon in the Ethos Core app. At exactly 4:03 a.m., he tapped Go Live, sending an encrypted stream to all 41 partner organizations and their invited stakeholders. Within seconds, the feed crackled to life, displaying crisp footage of the twins' first-class cabin, Tobias's stunned face, Theo's trembling form as they were ripped from their seats. Overlaid were real-time annotations from Ethos Core's AI. Confirmed, no prohibited item detected, bias score 0.02, minimal. Unjustified security actions, 100% confidence. Viewers watched in growing horror. The live stream was silent, except for the low hum of the cabin's ventilation system and the faint shuffle of feet. Langston narrated quietly, almost clinically. "This is flight AZ321, Zurich to Boston. 2 passengers, ages 15, were subject to a forced removal based on no evidence. AI logs confirm 0 security anomalies. I am Langston Bennett of Verdant Trust ESG Fund. You are witnessing a severe violation of passenger rights and ethical conduct. We demand transparency." On the other side of the Atlantic, ESG committee chairs in London and Paris paused their morning coffee. In New York, impact investors slammed their laptops shut, eyes flashing with anger. Within 10 minutes, over 50 global organizations, from the European Investment Council to the Pan-Asia Ethics Coalition, had issued formal statements demanding access to 7 years of passenger treatment equity data. The live annotations continued. Crew behavior analysis, prejudice detected, high confidence, passenger dignity metric, 12%, unacceptable. As the stream ticked past 15 minutes, Langston cut to a split screen. On the left, the AI annotated cabin footage. On the right, real-time tweets flooding in under #ethics lockdown, #justice for twins, and #passenger equity. In Geneva, the boardroom of the Global Aviation Ethics Alliance erupted into emergency session. Chairs pounded the table. "We need full public disclosure of all Ethos Core cabin monitor logs," demanded Dr. Elise Thompson, chair of the coalition. "This is not just about one flight, it's about systemic reform." Langston ended the stream at 4:28 a.m., confident the data had spoken louder than any press release. He leaned back, watching the initial flurry of public and private responses. Letters to Astrias International's board, calls for independent audits, and legal inquiries filed by civil rights advocates. Meanwhile, Tobias and Theo sat in the VIP lounge at Zurich's Terminal 8, phones in hand. Theo read aloud a statement from the European Securities Commission. In light of the evidence presented by Ethos Core, Astrias International and all affiliated financial institutions must publish their passenger treatment equity reports for the past 7 years. by end of day. Failure to comply will trigger automatic sanctions under global ESG regulations. Tobias exhaled, a mixture of relief and resolve washing over him. They listened, he said softly. Theo nodded, voice still shaky. They can't unsee it. Back at Astria's headquarters, an emergency ethics hearing convened at 8 a.m. local time. Langston joined remotely, his image projected on a giant screen in the boardroom. The airline's CEO, flushed and apologetic, faced a panel of regulators, investors, and civil rights representatives. Regulator: Mr. Bennett, your live stream unequivocally demonstrates a breach of duty and ethics. What remedies do you seek? Langston, calmly: full public disclosure, binding industry-wide ethics standards, and a direct apology to my sons on the airline's official channels. By midday, the hearing's outcomes were clear. Astrius International would publish 7 years of onboard ethics data, commit to an independent passenger treatment audit every 6 months, and issue a formal apology to Tobias and Theo Bennett. As the hearing adjourned, Langston closed his laptop. The world had witnessed injustice and acknowledged it. For two 15-year-olds and their father, the public reckoning was more than vindication. It was proof that systemic change could begin with a single act of transparency. By mid-morning, the Grand Marble Hall at the FAA's Washington headquarters was buzzing with anticipation. Banners bearing the new Bennett Protocol logo lined the walls. At a long oak table draped in dark blue cloth, 3 leaders prepared to sign history: the FAA administrator, the EU Aviation Commissioner, and Marcus Bennett, joined remotely by the Ethos Corps Board of Directors. Tobias and Theo Bennett sat front and center, their 15-year-old faces bright with relief and pride. The FAA administrator cleared her throat. Today, she began, voice firm, we commit to ensuring that every flight operates not only safely, but ethically. She tapped her pen on the document. AI cabin monitoring. Every passenger cabin must be equipped with discrete, real-time sensors that analyze interactions, tone, and movement to flag discriminatory behavior. Ethics scoring system. Airlines will implement a transparent scoring dashboard powered by Ethos Corps' AI that reports each flight's passenger dignity metric to regulators. Crew recertification. 100% of cabin crew and purser staff will complete mandatory equity and respect in aviation training annually. Across the table, the EU Commissioner nodded. This protocol unites our regulatory frameworks, she said. From Brussels to Beijing, from Boston to Bangkok, every airline under our jurisdiction will adopt these standards by Q1 2026. Marcus Bennett leaned forward, calm and collected. I'm honored to lend my name to these measures, he said, dipping his pen. This isn't just policy change, it's cultural change. We're embedding dignity into every takeoff and landing. He signed, then passed the pen to his sons, Tobias first, then Theo, allowing them to add their names as witnesses. Tobias's hand shook for a moment as the pen pressed into the paper. He glanced at Theo, whose grin tugged at the corners of his eyes. Both boys knew they had helped transform a moment of cruelty into a movement for fairness. Flashbulbs popped as photographers captured the milestone. Reporters pressed forward. Tobias, Theo, how does it feel? A fierce joy bubbled up inside Tobias. He stood, shoulders squared. It feels like justice can be more than a single moment. It can be built right into our skies. Theo chimed in. We hope no one else ever has to be dragged off the plane to make people listen. From now on, the system will listen first. Later, in a quieter corridor, Langston embraced his sons. You two did this, he said softly. You turned fear into action. Tobias pressed his head against his father's chest, the steady rhythms of Marcus's heart filling him with warmth. Across the globe, airlines scrambled to install AI sensors, retrain staff, and recalibrate their ethics scores. Social media buzzed with the new passenger dignity metric, a real-time gauge passengers could check before boarding. For Tobias and Theo, watching these changes roll out was proof that their ordeal had sparked something far greater than themselves. And as they boarded that same boarding bridge later that day, this time as honored guests for a celebratory flight, they passed through rows of crew members who met their eyes with nods of respect. Tobias realized that in those nods, he felt something he hadn't felt back on flight AZ321, a genuine welcome. The Bennett Protocol wasn't just a document. It was a promise that the skies would never again be a place where dignity could be stripped away at 20,000 feet. A week after the Bennett Protocol was signed, Astraeus International's executive boardroom felt like a ghost town. The polished mahogany table bore no nameplates. 3 seats remained conspicuously empty where their CEOs once sat. Laura Whitmore watched from her apartment window as news helicopters circled above the airline's headquarters, broadcasting her face in looped headlines. Discrimination ends career. First-class attendant fired. Astraeus loses 8 airport slots in 30-day ban. And 3 top CEOs resign amid ethics crisis. She sank onto her cream-colored sofa, remote in hand. Stunned, the world hadn't moved on the way she expected. A sponsor's commercial interrupted. At SkySafe, we believe dignity flies first. Laura turned away, bitterness twisting her stomach. Back at Astraeus, the airline's board chair, Isabel Cho, addressed a sparse assembly of legal advisors and PR executives. Her voice was steady, but filled with steel. Laura Whitmore's behavior catastrophically breached our passenger policy and global ethics standards. Effective immediately, she's terminated. No appeal. Behind Cho, a wall-mounted screen scrolled AshCloud's real-time compliance dashboard. Astraeus's ethics score was still recovering from a drop of 76 points, and the airport access module flagged 8 hubs: London Heathrow, JFK, Frankfurt, Singapore Changi, Tokyo Haneda, Dubai, Sydney, and Toronto Pearson, as suspended for 30 days. Cho tapped the screen. These suspensions will cost us over $18 million in landing fees alone. We've already lost 3 major ESG investors. Our only path forward is transparent reform and swift accountability. In Zurich, as ground crews refueled and inspected Flight AZ321 for its inaugural Ethics Compliance Demonstration flight, Laura's former colleagues quietly replaced her uniform. In cabin briefing rooms, young flight attendants rehearsed the new equity and respect scripts. None spoke Laura's name. Purser Michael Davies, once stoic and proud, had resigned 3 days earlier. His departure statement cited personal accountability for operational lapses. Within 24 hours, 2 other CEOs, Celeste Wings' Elena Martinez and Viridian Air's Marcus Delacroix, handed in their resignations, acknowledging systemic oversight failures. Their absence loomed over every departure board. Meanwhile, Tobias and Theo Bennett stood in the new first-class lounge at Logan Airport, now rebranded with the Bennett logo. A wall placard listed airline partners certified under the Bennett Protocol. The twins traced their fingers over the names, stopping at Astraeus International, now listed under pending review. Feels good to see change, Theo said quietly. But it's bittersweet. Tobias nodded. People lost jobs. Real people. He glanced at their father, Marcus, who stood nearby, fielding questions from reporters. Marcus caught Tobias's eye, offered a small nod of pride. Laura scrolled through LinkedIn recommendations turned into cautionary tales. Stories of flight crews retrained, customer satisfaction scores soaring, and countless passengers praising the Bennett Protocol's enforcement. She closed her laptop and stared at the empty wall where her award plaque once hung. In her head, she replayed that moment in first class, how easy it had been to impose her prejudices under the guise of security, confident no one would challenge a white, well-dressed attendant in control. She'd thought herself untouchable. Now she was untethered, her career grounded, her reputation in tatters. Outside Logan, a special test flight prepared for takeoff, Flight AZ322, an all-female crew certified under the new ethics standards, carrying invited guests and media. Tobias and Theo exchanged quiet smiles as they stepped aboard, surrounded by colleagues from the Global Youth Ethics and AI Forum. As the cabin doors closed, Tobias whispered to Theo, "We did that." Theo grinned. "Yeah, no one's dragging us off now." The engine spooled, the fuselage lifted, and for the first time in years, Astraeus International soared under the clear banner of ethics. High above, no one ever forgot that change came at a price, but also that it could be paid by the few to benefit the many. Tobias and Theo stepped onto the Boston Convention Center stage under a soft halo of spotlights. A crowd of educators, policymakers, and technology leaders filled the seats, murmuring with anticipation. Behind them hung a banner reading, "Global Youth Ethics and AI Forum." The same event that had set this whirlwind in motion. Theo cleared his throat and scanned the audience. At 15, speaking before hundreds could be terrifying, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just about a presentation. It was about legacy. He glanced at Tobias, who offered a steady, encouraging nod. Tobias stepped up to the microphone first. "Good evening," he began, voice calm but resonant. "A week ago, my brother and I were sitting in first class, excited, nervous, ready to share our work. Instead, we were slapped, dragged off a flight, and labeled criminals." He let that sink in, cutting his gaze across the room. "We lost more than seats. We lost our dignity." A hush followed. Theo leaned in, continuing, "But our father, Mr. Langston Bennett, taught us that dignity isn't stolen by one act of injustice. It's defended by every voice willing to speak up. So tonight, we announce the Theo and Tobias Equity Fund, a $3 billion initiative dedicated to ensuring that any passenger, of any age or background, can fly without fear." Applause rippled through the hall. Tobias raised his hand briefly, signaling for quiet. "This fund will support legal aid, advocacy training, and technology grants for young innovators studying bias in transport systems. We want every kid who's ever felt out of place to know there's a safety net." Theo smiled, eyes shining. "And it's named for us, not out of vanity, but so no one forgets that change can start with the most unlikely heroes, two 15-year-olds who refused to bow their heads." They stepped back as the forum organizer approached with a ceremonial pen. Together, Tobias and Theo signed a commemorative plaque that would hang at the forum's entrance, a silent reminder to every attendee. Equity belongs at every altitude. In the front row, Sarah, the junior flight attendant from Flight AZ321, wiped away tears. Laura Whitmore's old seat 3C remained empty, a testament to how far things had come. Even Purser Michael Davies, now working with a nonprofit on bias training, sat quietly, a small nod of acknowledgement exchanged between him and the twins. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed into networking receptions, Tobias found a moment alone on the empty stage. He looked out at the rows of seats where their ordeal had begun and ended. Theo joined him, and they linked arms. "Do you think they understand?" Theo asked softly. "I think they feel it," Tobias replied. "When systems fail us, people jammed into windowless rooms, they'll remember this moment." Theo smiled. "We changed altitudes. No more ceilings, no more grounded dreams." They stepped down together, ready to meet mentors, reporters, and friends. Their journey, from humiliation at 30,000 feet to rewriting the rules of the sky, had come full circle. And as they walked off stage, shoulder to shoulder, they carried with them a whisper of promise. Injustice may knock us down, but dignity will always lift us higher. If you were in Tobias and Theo's shoes, what would you do first after that public slap? Let us know in the comments.